In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the rear wheel hub and bearing assembly on this Lexus IS. We'll have to take the brakes apart for this. Let's get started. With the vehicle safely raised and supported, use a 21mm socket, remove all 5 lug nuts, and then pull the wheel off. As a note, if one of your lug nuts is the locking lug nut type with the little socket that fits right on it, do not use an impact tool on it. Break it free by hand before you lift the vehicle up, or it could snap the little splines on the tool. I don't have that on this wheel, so I'm just going to take all of them off with my socket and impact gun. If your wheel is stuck on, put a lug nut on it so that it doesn't fall off, and then from the back side, take a rubber mallet and tap the tire, not the wheel, and that should break it free. Remove the wheel. Let's start by removing all these springs that hold on the pads and lock in the 2 pins. So you can use some needle nose pliers or a little pry bar screwdriver to pop this out of the center of the pad, just like that. This will unlock this spring. Then you have to pull it out of the top pin, hold on to it, because otherwise it'll go flying, and pull it out of the bottom pin. Next we have this, which you have to pull out of the pads, but you can't remove it until you remove the lower pin, because as you can see, it loops around it. So let's get this pin out. You can do it a couple different ways. If yours isn't seized in here, you should be able to grab it and gently pull it out. A lot of times though, rust and brake dust buildup will cause these to be stuck, in which case you can tap it from the backside with a punch and a hammer. However, it looks like mine is coming out pretty easily. Just give it twists back and forth, and there it is. Now you can remove this, and now nothing's holding on this upper pin, so let's remove this one as well. This one is a little bit more stuck, so I'm going to take a hammer and gently tap it. Now I'll use some larger pliers so I can get a better grip. Twist and pull. And there it is. There's nothing holding on the pads anymore, so they should just slide straight out. But what happens most of the time is the caliper still applies a little bit of pressure on the pads, and also they're going to be stuck top and bottom. So what I like to do is stick a screwdriver in here and compress the piston a little bit so that I can at least remove the pads without struggling. I'm going to use this little pry bar and just pry this in a little bit, and this should give me just the amount of space I need to free up the pads. There we go. You're gonna have to go back and forth on these. There's one. This one's quite stuck in here. That's most likely due to rust. And there it is. At the top, you'll see a 19mm headed bolt. This is actually the slider pin. Goes all the way through and bolts the caliper onto its bracket. Let's break this free. Now there is only one at the top because the bottom, you'll see in a second, just slides right out. There's no bolt head. Unthread this all the way and remove it. Set this aside. The caliper should at this point freely pivot back. Mine is somewhat stuck, most likely because the lower slider pin is seized. So I'm going to have to persuade it a little bit with a pry bar and then most likely tap it off with a hammer. Hopefully that's not the case for you, and you can just tilt it back and slide it right off. Now I need some more space over here to tap this out, so what I will do is remove the rotor next. That'll give me the space I need to get the caliper off the rest of the way, and then we can continue. Once again, hopefully you can just slide this right out. The rotor may or may not slide right off at this point. Mine is seized onto the hub, so what I'm going to do is use a hammer, tap right between the lug studs, and that should break it free from the hub. We may have to de-adjust the parking brake shoes a little bit, and that means bringing them in right through this opening, but we'll see about that once it actually breaks free from the hub. Careful not to hit the studs. And that broke free, so I'm going to try and remove it. And as I suspected, it is stuck right over here. So what I will do is spin this to right about here. where the plug faces the back of the vehicle. I'm going to remove this plug. And now with a screwdriver, I can access the adjuster right through here. It'll be somewhat difficult to see, but I'll show you once the rotor is off. There's a little star wheel adjuster that you can spin one way or the other, and that'll either bring the shoes closer together or expand them. Obviously, you want to bring them closer together. If you look with a flashlight, you can typically see it. And you don't really know which direction to go at first, so try it out. And if it gets worse, well, go the other way. If it's better, then keep going. I'm pretty sure I got it right the first time. Let's try now. Perfect. Take that rotor off, and right there is that little adjuster that I was talking about. And all I did was I went through this opening and spun it. For me, from the front, I had to push towards the back of the vehicle, and that brought the shoes closer together. Okay, after a little bit of hammering, I was able to get this to break free, push it off of this slider, and there's your caliper. Secure this with a bungee cord so it doesn't pull on the brake hose. The axle nut is staked down, and we have to straighten it out a little bit to take it off a lot more easily. Take a punch or chisel that fits in here and a hammer, tap this in so we can make sure that this will unthread easily. That's as far as I can go. Now use a 32mm 12-point socket to remove this axle nut. Make sure the axle pushes through the hub. Mine does not very easily, so I'm going to take a punch and a hammer and at least break it free. There we go. Sometimes it needs a little extra force. The 4 bolts holding the wheel hub and bearing assembly in are going to be accessed from the back side. They are 10mm hex head bolts, so you'll have to have the appropriate socket for this, and most likely a swivel and some extensions to make this all work. The 4th bolt is right up here. You just can't see it because the axle's in the way of the view, but I'm going to remove them all one at a time, and hopefully they aren't too much trouble. Sometimes these get quite stuck in there. Looks like they can't fully come out. That's fine. I'll just leave them here. All right, we'll leave these bolts here. We'll go back to the front and knock this out. Now use a hammer, tap the wheel bearing side to side, top and bottom until it breaks free. Hopefully the entire assembly doesn't break free. Sometimes that happens with the backing shield and shoes and everything, so we'll try to avoid that if possible. Let's try to get the bearing out. There it is. Now do the best you can to clean the corrosion that's in here, and you basically want to get all around the aluminum as well as on the backing shield if it's rusted, and mine surprisingly is not. It's just the aluminum that has a lot of corrosion. So I'm going to try and get in there with a screwdriver or something to pick at it with. Once you have it as clean as it'll be, just rinse it down with some brake parts cleaner. And apply a thin coating of anti-seize inside where you cleaned to prevent further corrosion from building up. Apply some right over here as well. I'm going to put some on the splines of the axle as well. This will prevent it from getting stuck inside the hub in the future. Now take your wheel bearing and slide it on, and what you want to pay attention to is the bolt hole spacing. The ones that are towards the rear of the vehicle are actually further apart than the 2 front ones, so as you insert the wheel bearing, make sure that it lines up, otherwise you'll have to rotate it or remove it and reinstall it a bunch of times. Try to get it lined up from the beginning and slide it over the axle, the splines, push it into the knuckle. If you can, try to get at least one of the bolts started. It looks like I was able to get this lower front one started, just a couple turns, and that'll hold the wheel bearing on for me. So now let's go on the back side and start them all in, snug them up, and of course torque them. Slowly try to get these started. I'm gonna go in a cross pattern so that I can ensure that everything gets seated correctly. I have this one started, so I'm going up to that one over there. Okay, I got that one started. I'm gonna bring this in a little bit more. Okay, so they're all bottomed out. Let's grab the torque wrench and torque these to 52 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Doesn't matter where you start, I'm gonna make sure I go in a cross pattern. Double check them all if you want. And that is tightened up properly. Let's reinstall the axle nut, thread it on. I'm gonna bottom it out, and I'm not gonna use my power tool to tighten it. Of course, we're gonna torque it to spec so that I can clamp the bearing down properly. I'm just gonna use this to run it down. I stopped as soon as it stopped spinning, so now let's torque it to 214 foot-pounds. I have a pry bar that I'm gonna put right through the lug studs, and that's going to prevent the hub from spinning. Prop it up against something sturdy or hold it. And now, once again, 214 foot-pounds. That's it right there. We have to stake down the axle nut so we can lock it in. So take a chisel and a hammer and tap it down right here in the center of that cutout. That should be plenty right there. You don't have to completely crush it down. Coat the surface of the hub in a thin layer of anti-seize. That's going to prevent rust from building up in the future, and it'll make sure that the rotor doesn't seize on the hub in the future. You want to keep the layer thin, otherwise when you put the rotor on, it'll squish and fling out, and it's actually going to cover the parking brake surface where the shoes grab. Now you don't want that because the parking brake shoes will not grab if that's the case. I have a new rotor, so I'm not worried about it, but if you are reusing your old rotor, you want to make sure this mounting surface here, the hat of the rotor, is clean and free of rust buildup and debris so that it can mount flat up against the hub. Now take the rotor and slide it over the hub, press it on all the way. Now I know my parking brake shoes are completely de-adjusted, so I'm going to put the rotor opening right over here on the back side of the vehicle so I can adjust the parking brake shoes. One other thing I want to do is take an old axle nut and put it on one of the lug studs with a lug nut on. That's going to hold the rotor flat up against the hub so it doesn't fall off. If it falls off, yes, you can push it on, but not only is it a hassle, also it can actually indicate the wrong adjustment of the parking brake shoes because it'll be at an angle. Take any sort of spacer that you have. I'm using an old axle nut and a lug nut. I'm going to make sure this is seated, and I'm just going to tighten it up by hand. That's all you need so it can sit flat. Now let's take a screwdriver and spread the shoes apart until they start touching. Then I'll back them off a little bit until we have the right adjustment. What you're looking for with parking brake shoes is to almost not even hear them touch. You want to hear them maybe touch the rotor once in a while as you rotate, but that's it. Otherwise, they're too far adjusted. These are not drum brakes. I know for drum brakes you need a little bit of drag, but on parking brake shoes you do not. Otherwise they will overheat as you drive and it will wear them down, and it's actually going to cause these to potentially lock up the wheel. Oh, that's snugged up, which means, yep, we locked it up. So now the shoes are completely seated up against the rotor, so I'm going to back it off. Just a couple clicks, that's all it takes. And I'm going to listen for it. Okay, so it's hard to tell because the other side is audible as well, but I'm pretty sure this is actually perfectly adjusted right here. So what I will do now is go inside the vehicle, apply the parking brake. That's gonna center the shoes up nicely in here. We'll test it again and then either adjust further or remove some adjustment to get it just right. I applied the parking brake and removed it. So I hear it at times, but a little bit too much for my liking. So I'm just gonna bring it back a couple clicks. That's it. Okay, I like that a lot better. I'm gonna test it again, but that is adjusted. All right. One very important step is to put in the plug right here so that water and debris don't get in. Press it on. Okay, a couple pieces of information here. We have to clean up this pin at the bottom, which is attached to the bracket. Speaking of the bracket, these are the two bolts, 14mm headed bolts, that hold this on to the knuckle. I don't find a purpose in removing these other than to clean and inspect things, but as long as this is mounted correctly, there's no reason to remove this. If you were removing this, it would most likely only be for replacement purposes. The torque for these is going to be 48 foot-pounds, so just torque them accordingly when you put it back. And this pin right here has to be cleaned, which is the only thing that is to be touched on this bracket when preparing for new brakes. Let's remove this boot so we can clean underneath it. Inspect the boot. If it's in poor condition, as in torn or swollen, replace it, but mine looks pretty good. Now when it comes to the pin, you can remove it with a 10mm Allen, but there's once again no reason to remove this. It's just right here, so let's clean it. There is surprisingly a limited amount of corrosion considered how stuck the caliper was on here, but I will do my best to clean it with a wire wheel or wire brush and then re-lubricate it so we can install the caliper. You want to make sure you get right in this groove here. That's where the boot seals up. Rinse it with brake parts cleaner. I'm going to lubricate the area that the boot seals up on with some silicone paste, which is rated for brakes, and that means it withstands high temperatures. Then I'm going to put a little bit of silicone paste along the entire pin, but not a lot, and I'll show you why. And after that, I'm going to put the boot back over it, and this is why, because if you put too much, the boot will just wipe it off. So just a thin layer, press the boot up and over that lip, which is crucial for it to seal up. All right, perfect. And now if you wanted to, you could take some extra brake grease or silicone paste and stick it inside of that boot. Just do the best you can. There we go. So that now, as you slide the caliper over, it's going to have a little reserve in there to keep it lubricated over time. Let's clean the caliper side of that pin. So I'm going to fill this hole, well, almost fill it with brake parts cleaner. I'm just going to give it a quick rinse first. Then I will use a bore brush and clean out the area. Rinse it out. I want to make sure that lip on the outside is clean too. And I'm going to make sure that it is lightly lubricated with some silicone paste so it can slide on easily. And of course, right up here where the boot seals up. Now take your caliper, slide it over that pin, and press it on all the way. What you're looking for is that boot to be seated completely. Press it and use a little screwdriver to pry it away to release any excess air that might be built up in there as you press it on. And that is properly installed. Lubricate the top slider pin boot where this goes through, and this is the one that we unthreaded earlier. Bring your caliper up into position and get the pin through and thread it on. Make sure this slides properly, which it does. Tighten this up. Snug it, and torque this to 18 foot-pounds. That's it. Now when it comes to the caliper, which is where the pads ride, typically I like to avoid putting silicone or brake grease on here because this will collect a lot of junk. However, because I had to clean it, there is now somewhat exposed fresh metal here, and there's already rust buildup. So I'm going to very carefully apply a very thin layer of silicone paste that is, of course, like I said, rated for brakes, and that is going to prevent rust from continuing to build up on this area where the pads ride. Similarly, I'm going to apply some inside of these holes where the pins will ride, and that is mostly so that they don't get stuck. I'm not so concerned about the gunk buildup here. I just don't want them to rust in the future. Slide the brake pads in. The inner pad is going to have a wear indicator that goes on the bottom, and then the outer pad does not have any wear indicator. Now slide your pins through. I clean these up just a little bit so I can get rid of the rust buildup. This way they slide in easier. When you slide this lower one through, you want to make sure the spring that goes down here is in its position, ready to get the pin slid through it. And then we'll just hook this onto the pad. And then the pins will have a couple little holes, and that's where this clip goes in, which is kind of like a cotter pin for the pins and prevents these from sliding out. And this little hook needs to go right in the hole of that pad. When I removed it, I used needle nose pliers, so that's what I'm going to use to put it back in. And that is installed. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, torque them to 76 foot-pounds. "76 foot-pounds in a cross pattern, here we go. Double check them. Job is done. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.